Do you have the guts to fight and win in a competitive marketplace? And does your business have the guts to fight and win when the chips are down? Well, I'll tell you, one organization that had a lot of guts was B Troop. B Troop 173rd Airborne. They were one of my companies, and this company photo was taken right after a major firefight in the mountains of Afghanistan. And these guys were absolutely extraordinary, winning every single firefight, good at what they did. No unit fought better than B Troop. And the reason for that was this guy on the left, Captain Tom Bostick, my best company commander, best combat leader in the entire brigade. And Tom was extraordinary. His men, his soldiers absolutely trusted and respected. They loved this guy. I remember training with him. I'm doing like, running up hills and diving in mud, as he's teaching people battle drills. And it was an absolute blast. He loved his soldiers. They loved him, and they knew when push came to shove that Tom always had their back. And he was absolutely masterful in everything that he did. So yeah, that's him there. I'm on the right, and one of our generals is there in the center. Tom's talking to him about that firefight that I just described. Now, Tom was married to Jennifer. Jennifer, absolutely wonderful. And Tom was on his 4th deployment to Afghanistan. And Jennifer comes up to me, and they've got 2 kids, Jessica and Ashley. Jennifer comes up to me after, we just had, this is like right before we deployed. She said, "Chris, make sure you take care of Tom. He's on his 4th deployment, and I want him back in one piece." And I said, "Jennifer, we'll take good care of Tom." So that summer, 2007, so about 10 years ago, we deployed to the Hindu Kush, the mountains of Afghanistan, in the area circled in red. And it was one of the most violent, deadliest places in the country at that time. And Tom's unit was up in the northern part of the circle, and then there were some other folks down in the southern part. But as soon as we arrived in the area, took over from a unit that had just been there maybe 9 months, the firefight started. And they were getting bigger and bigger every day. Now, one of the things that we believed in was talking to people and getting to know people and understanding what was motivating them, what was driving them. And so one morning, July 27th of 2007, Tom decided that he was going to visit a village that had never seen Americans before. And we had gotten some firefights from nearby that village. So Tom decides he wants to come say hi and just figure out what's going on. So he went to visit the elders, and what do you notice about this picture? There's no guns, but there's one elder, right? There's one old guy and a bunch of kids. So he's there to see the elders of the village. Only one of them shows up. You've got a bunch of munchkins and, of course, no military-age males. So the conversation goes on for about an hour, and Tom notices that all the kids had sort of floated away, and he gets this very creepy feeling that something's just not quite right. So he politely ends the conversation. They move outside the village, and as soon as they move outside this village, this massive firefight erupts, the biggest that we had seen in our first 60 days there. And it's taken place in this mountain valley. In fact, I took that picture of an airstrike going in on enemy positions during this firefight. So I was at a command post about 5 kilometers away, working with Tom during this engagement. And this firefight went on for about 3 hours. And as everything sort of quieted down, I called Tom on the radio. Bulldog 6, that was him, that's Tom. This is Sabre 6, that's me. Bulldog 6, this is Sabre 6, what's the situation? And Tom calls back, everything's under control. He described to me what happened, what they were doing next, and so that all sounded good to me. And then things got very quiet again. And that's when I heard it. This boom that echoes down the mountain valley. And the firefight renews with even greater intensity than what we had beforehand. And then a few minutes into the fight, I hear something come across the radio that says, the CP's been hit. Now, CP meant command post, which meant that Tom was under direct fire. So I gave it a few minutes and I called him up. Bulldog 6, this is Sabre 6. No answer. Bulldog 6, this is Sabre 6. Silence. Bulldog 6, this is Sabre 6. Radio, silence. Now, what I heard next on the one level made me very proud. His lieutenants and his sergeants, his middle management, coordinating with one another, calling in airstrikes, calling in artillery strikes, and taking the fight to the enemy. On another level, I knew. I can recall the memorial ceremony like it was yesterday. And you can see the agony on our faces as we remembered the service and sacrifice of Tom Bostick and another soldier named Ryan Fritchie. And the person responsible for all of this insurgency, for all of the fighting, the person responsible for the death of my friend and other people was this guy right here, a guy named and this guy was a jihadi leader during the Afghan-Soviet War, and he was at it again. And he had about 95% of the population with him. And I knew that if we were ever going to be successful in this area, we had to get at that guy. So we took stock of what was going on. And Tom was gone, but the lessons of his leadership were not. So first and foremost was the importance of great leadership. And Tom had that. He trained his middle management, he trained his soldiers to be as good as he was. And if he was not there, he knew that his middle management could pick it up. So let me ask you this. If there was a major crisis in your company, an existential threat, and you weren't there to handle it, could your middle management fight and win in that crisis? And if the answer is no, or the answer is I don't know, then we've got some work to do. And we were confident across the organization of about 800 paratroopers that we had absolutely superb leaders. We were together for 2 years, and Tom was the best, but we had all sorts of leaders just like him. And we had great teams that were thriving in a culture that, you know, everybody's got this view of the Army as this kind of command and control, right? And the person at the center gives the orders and everybody like automatons obeys them. Not like that in reality. And we had developed this culture of being able to challenge one another's ideas, to question them, to question my ideas. I valued that as a commander. And I knew that if they didn't question my ideas in peacetime, they weren't going to question it in war when things really counted. And so we spent 2 years developing that culture where people are engaged and people were thriving. That was good. Where we had our major problem was with strategy. Because all of the assumptions, all of the information we had about the environment, all the assumptions that we made in developing our plans and how we were going to go about working in this environment were flat ass wrong. And so we could continue doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. But I knew as I sat on the side of that mountain that the very people that we thought we were helping, as we sort of looked at ourselves and thought what a great job we're doing, the very people we thought we were helping were the ones that were fighting us. And if we didn't fundamentally change what we were doing, we could do all of the big operations for the next 13 months of our deployment, and it wouldn't make a darn bit of difference. In fact, the enemy was just going to keep getting stronger and stronger. So we had to completely rethink what we were doing. And that was my responsibility. And I had about 800 paratroopers counting on me to figure this out. And we had some major challenges as we were kind of think through how do we fundamentally adapt to this environment. We were we had 800 paratroopers scattered across an area about the size of the country of Andorra and equally mountainous, or if not more mountainous. We couldn't afford, we knew, to have a very centralized organization because every village, every valley, every location was different. So we had to rely on our junior leaders, our middle management, to be able to make decisions. In the Army, we call it the strategic corporal, right? The decisions by middle management can have huge consequences. And we had to do all of this, figure out how to change while we're fighting for our lives against a deadly and growing insurgency. So let me ask you this. Do you know any business that has to deal with wide geographic dispersion, that is working together with people of a foreign country, speaking a different language, very different culture? Do you know any organization, any business that has figured out that, look, the command and control economy, the command and control business is not going to work, and what we actually need to do is empower people throughout our organizations to be able to make decisions, and you need them to be good decisions that advance the business rather than screw it up? And do you know any business that is in a highly competitive marketplace with competitors that are trying to take your clients, to take your market share, and maybe even bring down your business? Everybody's nodding. Exactly. Well, that's what we faced in Afghanistan. The context was different, but the challenges are fundamentally the same. And the solutions, the approaches, the insights are also fundamentally the same. One of the things that great leaders know is that you learn the most when you go outside your comfort zone. And so the best leaders look at their challenges and look at their situations and deliberately use history or use different context to help them think through. And that's when you get the breakthrough ideas. That's when you get the innovations, is when you go outside your comfort zone and you learn. And that's what today is all about. So the importance of strategic leadership, this synthesis, this integration of leaders, teams that are in a thriving culture, and a strategy that enables you to compete and win is more important than ever, especially if you are a small or a medium-sized business. And here's why. Digital technology is changing the social and economic environment in ways that we have not fully appreciated. And one of the things that two of the things that digital technology is doing is it's creating much greater requirements and expectations for autonomy throughout the depth of your organization. You need people throughout your organization to be able to make good decisions. And digital technology is also increasing the scale and pace and deadliness, if you will, of competitive interaction. So here's a few data points. Before digital technology, the big companies kind of stayed with the mega cities and the huge population centers. Now, companies like Amazon and Walmart and Carrefour can reach down and go where small businesses and medium businesses used to thrive. They're not stuck with the major cities anymore. They can go into the neighborhoods. All the old mom and pop stores, which we used to call them in the United States, all going out of business. When you want a widget, or you want to know who has the best service, what's the first thing you do? You Google it. Exactly. You Google it and you figure out, oh, well, these are all the folks that provide this widget. These are all the folks that provide this business. And then what do? You look at the assessments, you look at the evaluations, and you look for companies with a track record. So if somebody's got 4.5 or 4.7 stars out of 5, they're styling. If somebody's got 2 or 3 stars out of 5, they're sucking. And when you're deciding where you're going to put your money, where are you going to put it? Yeah, the 4.5 star organization. So the consequences of not getting it just right. The consequences of not being able to compete and win are bigger for small and medium-sized businesses than ever, because the Amazons and the Walmarts and everybody else who can scale this and can now use digital technology to reach down in places where you used to thrive is absolutely deadly. Here's what's going on. So when you look at the intersection of high degrees of autonomy and competitive interaction, they create what you might call a strategic environment. And a strategic environment means you need to think strategically, not tactically. You need to think and act strategically, because what this intersection, what this clash of high degrees of autonomy, especially for our junior leaders, and highly competitive interaction do is they create extreme levels of uncertainty and extreme levels of complexity, both of which combine to make the business environment really unpredictable. So it's very difficult to understand exactly what's going on, what other people are going to do next, how it's affecting your business, and then to make decisions about the future. So many moons ago, before digital technology, when you didn't have this sort of intensity of competitive interaction, when you didn't have this collapsing economic space, CEOs would rise through the ranks of their organization in these larger firms, and they would have 20, 30, 40, 50 years of experience of dealing with these sort of issues. And they've got huge staffs to help them think through it. And you know what? Only a handful of them were any good at it after all that experience. Now that same burden is on each one of us and on our junior leaders. They've got a lot of autonomy. They're dealing with intense interaction. And you know what? Nobody's teaching them how to deal with this stuff. And they haven't amassed the experience to be able to do it. Now, sure, there are some superhuman people out there, some mutants who are able to just deal with this stuff. They've just got the natural aptitude. But for the rest of us mortals, we need the experience and the development to handle this kind of stuff. And you know what? Nobody's given it. And here's the result. The Center for Creative Leadership in America estimates that nearly 50% of leaders in business have risen to their levels of incompetence. That means that 1 out of every 2 leaders are evaluated by his or her peers and employees and leaders to suck at what they do. And the impact of that is, in the United States, 70% of employees in a recent Gallup poll, 70% of employees have reported that they feel unengaged at work. And that figure is 90% worldwide. So that means at best, 7 out of 10 of your employees and employees in your business find working with you and working with your business to be a soul-sucking experience. Now imagine if those numbers were reversed. Imagine the impact if 70% or 90% of your employees were engaged in advancing your business, in making the kind of impact that you want to make on the world by starting that business. The change would be transformational. But at this point, our leaders are failing. And so here's what's happening. Let's just take a look at some data points. The financial crisis of 2008. So you had hedge funds creating these new financial instruments, and everybody's feeling really good about them. And they're taking off, and then they hit a competitive environment where people start questioning, hey, are these collateralized debt obligations really a good thing? And they start poking at them, and suddenly these hedge firms are in a strategic environment, and then you get an epic fail. And the cost to the American economy alone is $12.8 trillion and counting. How about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan? Started off with great initial military successes, hit a strategic environment with local actors and international actors, and what we have 13 and 16 years later, quagmire. Conflicts with no end in sight that have cost over 7,000 American soldiers dead, tens of thousands of wounded, not to mention well over 100,000 Iraqi, Syrian, Afghan, Pakistani civilians wounded and killed, and a cost to the United States taxpayer of $2.4 trillion. That's the size of the GDP of France. Hitting a bit closer to home, the S&P 500, the 500 biggest companies in America, did you know that a company falls off of that index every 2 weeks? So every 2 weeks, a company falls off and another one comes back on. And then another one falls off and another one joins. And this pace has been accelerating so that by 2027, 75% of the companies that were on the index in 2011 will no longer be present 16 years later. Anybody know this guy? Yeah, Travis Kalanick, right? Uber. And Uber's on this meteoric rise, and just as they're about to transform the transportation industry, he grows toxic. You've got all of these reports of legal problems and sexual harassment problems. And what happens? Kalanick has an epic fail. Now, maybe Uber will survive, but maybe it won't. And this affects nonprofits too. So the Central Asia Institute in 2004 was about a $25,000 nonprofit managed by a visionary founder from his kitchen table. After a successful book, this nonprofit rockets into becoming a $25 million organization nearly overnight. But they didn't grow the management infrastructure. The board didn't hold them accountable for doing that. And so then people, when you kind of rise above the parapet, people might want to knock you down a bit. So that's exactly what happened. People with an axe to grind, people maybe that didn't like them, start to poke around and start to do documentaries that are not quite based fully on the facts, but it begins to resonate because the organization can't show exactly where the money's going. And then 60 Minutes, a famous, very popular newscast in the United States, does a special on it, and the organization goes into freefall. They actually called me in 2014 and said, hey, can you help us pull out of the nosedive? And so I began working with them, and thanks to a great executive director who's hired a dynamite team and a fully committed board, what you've seen in this organization now is they're back on the upswing. And you know what? They're doing all the right things. They're putting all the right management structures in place. They're putting all the right systems in place. And they're growing, and their executive director has said, you know what? I need to grow my management too. I need to develop them. So what they've done is signed up for our one-year development program. So they're putting all of the right things in place so that as they take off again, it's going to be sustainable. Why are we getting it so wrong? Big businesses, governments, militaries, small businesses, nonprofits. Why do we keep screwing it up? Well, there's three big reasons. The first one is we fail to develop leaders. We look at it as somebody else's job. Oh, well, you're supposed to learn that in business school or on-the-job training. And a lot of business leaders I hear say, well, if I just had more time on the clock, if I could just, move those hands back, I'd maybe have time for the soft stuff like leader development. Or if I just had more resources, if I just had more money, I could do it, but I don't. And so it becomes somebody else's problem. It never happens. Now, how many people have a retirement fund? Yeah, most of us do, right? Now, imagine if you're somebody who says, you know what? I'm going to invest in my retirement fund after I finish buying everything I want this month. And with the money left over, I'll put it in the fund. you know exactly what's going to happen 20 years later. Yeah, you're going to have a hurting fund. Or imagine the professional athlete, the tennis player, who says, you know what, I know how to play the game, and I really don't need to practice anymore. I'm just going to play the games, and I'm going to get better by playing the games. That's what OJT training is, right? I'm going to get better by playing the games. And then they run up against Serena Williams, who does deep practice every day, and Serena will kick their ass every single time because Serena practices. And if we don't practice leadership, and we don't practice culture, and we don't practice strategy, we're just like the people that show up to the games and hope for the best. Second, we fail to develop our teams and our culture. So again, this is somebody else's problem. So we hire the guru, right, who comes in and we have a culture day. And we have a group hug and we talk about our values and we write them down and we put them up on the wall and we feel really good about ourselves. And we have 360 feedback sessions, right, where the employees stand and us as business leaders are saying they're very contrite. And our employees say, well, you do this well, but you got to do this better. And we're like, okay, I'll improve. And then what happens? Not a damn thing. And it creates major cynicism in the organization. And third, we fail to think strategically. We fail to develop strategies. And in fact, in small and medium businesses, we often don't know how to do strategy. And so what do? We hire the strategic planners, the charlatans to come in. And they'll create these huge telephone book thick plans. And they say, hey, now you're good to go for the next 5 to 10 years. And these plans are based on forecasts and assumptions that can't possibly hold true, even in the next 3 to 6 months. And so what happens is most people just put those things on a shelf and they gather dust, never to be seen again, or gather cyber dust on a hard drive. The unlucky few decide that they have got to follow the plan, even if the assumptions and the situation has changed. And of course, they're on a fast track to major failure. What are the results? Well, we start the business, things start to go pretty well, we feel good about ourselves, and then we never grow. We don't grow our revenue, we don't grow our impact, and most businesses are zombies. They're walking dead. And at some point in the near future, they're going to flounder and fail, or somebody's just going to cut out their market share and they're done. A few organizations hit the jackpot. Now he's got a big smile on his face. And the organization is rocketing into a strategic environment, but guess what? He hasn't built the management infrastructure, doesn't have the strategy to deal with it, and you know what happens. Middle management can't handle the new demands. They kick all the problems upstairs. Now the CEO is trying to do their jobs as well as his. You start to get frustrated. You start to lose sleep. You're not spending time with your family. And then you become toxic. And you get what we call catastrophic growth, growing beyond your ability to handle it. What's the first thing you think of when you see this phone? It's outdated, right? Absolutely. It's ancient, it's old school, it's Old Testament. Well, so are our leader development models. They're way out of date because they haven't adapted to the new environment, the new technological forces, the digital technology, which are creating social change in the workplace, resulting in economic change in the marketplace. So let me ask you this. Are the same models of, you learn leadership as in your MBA program, you have culture days, and you hire the fancy consulting firms to develop your plan. Are the same methods going to yield different results?